So today is a day dominated by monetary policy discussions with the U.S. making a decision yesterday, U.K. expecting their decision later today. Next week, Nigeria's MPC meets as Monetary Policy Committee to consider what to do about their benchmark rates. So we're going to be reviewing their options now. Joining us to discuss further, Dr. Omobola Adu, who is an investment research analyst with Afrinvest Research and Consulting. Doctor, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you for having me. Good morning. So, I mean, look, we had trade data out that just came out a couple of days ago. We also had inflation data for Nigeria. There's a whole, what are the options that the MPC is going to be looking at when they settle down to make their own decision on the benchmark rate?
Yeah, so thank you. So basically, we expect the CBN or the Monetary Policy Committee to look at developments in the global and domestic environment, right? In the global environment, they'll be looking at, just yesterday, like you mentioned, the US Fed decided to hike interest rate by about 25 basis points to a range of 0.25 to 0.5%. Interestingly, that's the first time in over 3 years that they've increased their policy rates. And in terms of how we see this playing out in terms of the Nigerian economy, we expect this could lead to weaker capital inflows into the economy. If we look at statistics that we have as at January, capital outflows in the Nigerian exchange group rose by around 17%. So we witnessed more capital outflows in the economy. In terms of foreign participation dropped to around 12% compared to around 22% at the ending of last year. So we're likely to see weaker capital inflows coming into the economy. You also consider what is happening between Russia and Ukraine and how this is playing out in the global commodities markets. And you consider that, this could have been beneficial to Nigeria in terms of what oil prices is doing. But then again, you have to factor in the subsidy payments they've been making. Bringing it back home to the domestic economy, right? Not so far away, we realized that we grew by around 3.4% full year. We look at, in terms of other leading economic indicators that we have, unfortunately, we don't have so much again, apart from maybe looking at the stock market where currently is up by around 11%. And fresh on the CBN's mind will be the recently released inflation data, right? Inflation went up by around 15.7% thereabout, largely driven by this false scarcity and other electricity issues, also going to food prices and food inflation. So we believe, amongst other factors, this will be some of the major things that the Monetary Policy Committee would consider to make their decisions next week.
All right, now we've got that data up, so we're going to put up our trade and inflation data. But what are as we look at all these figures coming through, what are the pros and cons of a rate hike?
Yeah, so in terms of a rate hike, they would expect that theoretically when the interest rate goes up or when CBN have moved to increase their interest rates, that should help to combat inflation, right? But we are in a situation where Nigeria's inflation over the last couple of years has been driven mostly by supply factors, talking about the clashes between farmers and herdsmen, more recently the false scarcity when we imported substandard PMS into the country. So on a pros angle, you might expect that, this interest rate hike could possibly help to combat inflation. But then again, our inflation has mostly been driven by structural factors, which the policy tool might be impotent in trying to bring down this inflation. Also, we look at pros in terms of capital inflows, right? Earlier I mentioned about we've seen declining capital inflows into the Nigerian economy. By increasing policy rate, that in a way could incentivize foreign investors, considering what we're seeing with US with their rate hike. But then again, we're living in a situation or in a country where we have so many capital control measures, right? So bringing in your money in today, you're not sure if you're able to get it out at a good rate, considering exchange rates. We also think about it in terms of cons that by increasing the policy rates, you are having a situation where other interest rates in the economy would possibly react to, and then it could lead to increased cost of borrowing. We know that on the average, around over 70% of our revenue is used to service our debt. So you are looking at a situation where the cost of borrowing is likely to go up. And so in a way that could disincentivize the Monetary Policy Committee from increasing the policy rates.
All right, great. So now flip it now. Pros and cons of a rate reduction if they get dovish.
Yeah, so for that, I mean, the biggest possible pros for that is in terms of helping to support the economy, right? The Nigerian economy is still very fragile, even though we grew by around 3.4% last year. So loosening the policy rates could help to stimulate the economy, right? You help to expand the economy and possibly put out more lending in the economy that will help businesses to grow. But the downside there is then that the CBN or the Monetary Policy Committee would have to deal with monetary-induced inflation. So figures that we have as a January shows that the total money available in the economy expanded by around 6 trillion to 45 trillion, thereabout. So you're having a situation where in the next couple of months, you could be dealing with both structural induced inflation and monetary induced inflation. The other possible benefits is that by losing the rate, you can help to stimulate purchasing power and generally help the economy. But like I said, the downside to that is you are having more inflation. Your commodity or your fixed income market becomes less attractive also to foreign investors. So in a way, it becomes a dilemma for the CBN on what they should do.
It's not easy. All right, so I'm going to throw that dilemma to you now. So thank you for all this. So based on everything we've discussed, the pros and the macroeconomic backdrop, the pros and cons of a rate hike that's going hawkish, the pros and cons of a rate reduction going dovish, what do you think? What do you think they do next week when they meet?
So, I mean, the current economic realities basically points to a situation where you won't be surprised if the CBN goes ahead to increase their policy rate. But you'd have to consider, especially looking at inflation and what is happening in the global financial markets, right? So US just increased rate hike, and we expect this won't be the last time they are going to do it.
Right.
So we expect them to do it maybe 4 to 5 times later this year. So basically, we're still in the early days, right? The global economy is basically fragile. The IMF basically hinted that they could revise global growth projections downwards. So when you consider all these factors together, you won't be surprised if they keep rates unchanged in their meeting next week. I mean, if you react now to rate hike in US, so is there a situation where the next time they increase it, are you going to react again?
Gotcha.
So I believe looking at possible situations where we might see a rate hike, that might not come at least until maybe May, when we have more information about the direction of the global economy, domestic economy. GDP figures for the first quarter should be out by around April, May, thereabout. So by that we should have better information.
So a hold, that's what we're going for.
So we should most likely see a hold decision by the CBN.
Dr. Omobola Adu, investment research analyst with Afrinvest Research Consulting. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.